What's good, everybody? My name is Leila, or Dr. Leila Ellis-Nelson. I am one of the assistant professional practice professors here at Roosevelt through the Department of Psychology. I teach between the undergraduate, master's, and the doctoral program, but the reality of it is if you need something, feel free to let me know. Always feel free to connect with me via email. I can be reached at lellisnelson@roosevelt.edu. You'll hear back from me very quickly, and I'll make sure to help you out to the best of my ability. And often, if I don't have the answer to something, more than happy to connect you to someone throughout the university or even in the community to help you resolve whatever may be going on in the moment. But I did want to take a second and thank Carl through MSSS for offering me an opportunity just to talk to you all a little bit more about just mental health as a whole, right? So I identify as a Black woman. So my understanding of mental health is a little bit different than some of the typical people that you hear usually having these dialogues and these conversations. And honestly, the reality of it is it comes from knowing the history of mental health services and Black people. And then me doing my own research to better understand what that is, but also looking into how mental health services have impacted the lives of other BIPOC folks. And by BIPOC, I mean Black, Indigenous, and other non-Black persons of color. So if you identify as Asian or Hispanic, Latinx, Latino, all of those things, definitely this is one of those dialogues that we don't typically have in our communities. So just to start off, exactly what is mental health or mental wellness, mental illness, and all that other good stuff? Mental health essentially is going to do anything that has to deal with mood disorders, and by mood disorders, depression, anxiety, psychotic disorders. So anything that has to do with hallucinations or delusions like schizophrenia, or even sometimes people just are stressed out, okay? If anything, we're in the middle of a pandemic. So all of us are carrying around a lot of additional stress, a lot of additional pain, fear, and concern that honestly just wasn't there before a lot of this happened. And for a lot of us, this is our primary stressor. This is the main thing that's impacting how we understand ourselves, how we experience the world, whether or not we see it as safe or unsafe, whether or not we consider our needs as being able to be met or not met because of being able to leave the house. Do stores even have everything you need? Being able to deal with only your social stuff, right? I love my friends to death. But one of the things that we haven't been able to do is really kiki because of what's going on outside. And that's just us wanting to be safe and take care of each other. So mental health isn't just about people dealing with significant issues that are typically what you're going to find in the DSM. And by DSM, I mean the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. If you're not going into psychology or don't have a diagnosis, you probably are like, ugh. But the DSM is helpful on our end to really allow us to differentiate between what are some of the more significant issues worthy of a diagnosis and other forms of treatment. Sometimes treatment means medication. Sometimes treatment is going to therapy, whether that's individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy, couples therapy. And couples therapy can be for people who are in a monogamous relationship, if you're in a poly relationship. So all types of stuff. Or some people who just need to find some assistance working on their own coping skills and just setting boundaries with other people too. Honestly, that's what a lot of us need to do a lot better with, is setting boundaries, learning how to say no, working to really understand and listen to our bodies and listen to our minds and listen to our spirit, to what is actually telling us that we need, so that we can show up for ourselves and take care of our stuff in the same way that we do that for other people. We often tend to deprioritize what our needs are, and then it gets coded as, oh, well, that's being selfish, or, well, this person's always done this for me, or this person raised me, so I have to go out of my way to do X, Y, and Z. And the reality of it is you can do all of that, but eventually you're gonna run out of steam. And then you aren't gonna be any good to anybody. So part of my work as someone who is an advocate for not just mental health and mental wellness, but also people who are looking to set boundaries, is to recognize the value in centering what your needs are, so that if showing up for other people is something that you want to prioritize, you can actually do that in a way that allows you to still be healthy and well and provide them with the resources they need, instead of it decentering you and causing you lots of additional pain. So all of that falls under the umbrella of mental health. We essentially just want to make sure that what's happening up here and what's happening in here is healthy, it is positive, and it's coming from a place where you have adaptive skills and coping mechanisms. And by adaptive, that just means that stuff is working for the good of you and not deteriorating you. But we can also honor that there can be barriers to your ability to even be able to do that or get that way. So, some of the barriers that typically exist, and we're going to talk about the really big one first, right? Systemic oppression, white supremacy, financial inequity. A lot of us come from communities where there are not a lot of therapists. Hell, there aren't even a lot of different types of schools or stores where you can go to get food that isn't just stuff that's prepackaged and processed. A lot of us come from environments where we don't necessarily have parks that we can go to where we can just walk around and enjoy nature. It's also born out of just knowing that racism and prejudice and bias are very real when you go in to see certain doctors. We know this as a result of things like the Tuskegee experiments, which happened between the 1930s and the 1960s and 70s, where Black men, approximately 600 total, were part of an experiment through the US government that gave about 399 of them syphilis without their consent and without their knowledge. And it led to a lot of death and other issues and the deterioration of lots of Black families. So that is not the only incident where racism and prejudice have negatively impacted our ability to really feel safe about going to doctors or mental health professionals, but it's one incident that happened on a very large platform and also led to us having new rules and regulations put in place to ensure that things, at least in this type of format, don't happen again. So that's why there are institutional review boards, there are ethics committees, and these are groups of people that specifically will remove licenses and things of that nature to make sure that people who are practicing and providing care aren't just out here being wild about it in the first place and purposefully trying to cause harm just for the sake of science, because we know that that's bullshit anyway. So these are some of the things that get included in barriers, because it's not just the knowledge of knowing that unfortunate incidents like this happen, but that they still persist. You've seen plenty of articles, especially even now as a result of the pandemic, where Black people, Hispanic folks, other persons of color have gone to the doctor and they haven't been believed, right? They've been sent home, and in being sent home, they end up passing away. Other family members are getting sick. These are just part of a larger issue of systemic racism and prejudice and bias that exists within medical and mental health fields. So yes, that becomes one of the big barriers. Also, equity and access. Like I mentioned earlier, not all of us have environments that allow for us to actually go see people. And say you do know that you can make an appointment somewhere. Do you have insurance? That becomes a barrier. Do you have the $2.50 to get from point A to point B on the other side of town to go actually make an appointment, then $2.50 to get back? Do you feel safe going to other neighborhoods or environments, downtown, Wicker Park, Lincoln Park, Hyde Park, Bronzeville, to go see someone who's going to provide you mental health care, because maybe there aren't any private practices or psychologists or psychiatrists in your area? So all of these things become barriers. But in addition to the barriers, we as a culture also have the stigma attached to mental health anyway. We typically, and again, I'm just speaking in general, I know this isn't true for everyone, but what I've tended to hear is, well, anything that you have that's wrong with you in your head is just in your head and you need to get over it. There's this assumption that because our ancestors dealt with so much, that nothing we deal with now is worthy of our attention in that realm. And honestly, that's just not true. The reality of it is your pain and the things you're experiencing are just as worthy and valid to be addressed, to be honored, to be seen, and to be heard in the same way that the pains and experiences of other people are, even when they may be dealing with something different. So we never want to get into the position of the struggle Olympics, because at the end of the day, no one wins in that. But what happens is we need to create an environment where we're more concerned about ensuring people are cared for than we are about trying to one up them with our traumas. Because at the end of it, if everyone is just trying to overdo someone with their traumas, then everybody's going to be messed up at the end. So, and we don't need that. So that becomes part of the stigma. We typically see mental health issues as a weakness or someone who doesn't pray enough. How many times have you heard, oh, you need to just go pray X, Y, and Z away, or you need to go just, reaffirm your relationship with God? That's cool and all. And I want you to be able to connect to your spirituality, connect to your faith. But also, your spirits and Jesus and them made therapists, so go use them too. You can have both. Actually, you should be seeing both. But typically, what happens is we attempt to pray stuff away or ignore it because we don't want to deal with the stigma that gets attached to it. We don't want anybody talking mess about us. We don't want to be seen as weak, especially if you start to mix in things related to gender and sexual orientation and all those other ways that we confound our stigmas and our stressors. And we don't deal with them. So we get into relationships or we make these connections with other people. And even the connection we have with ourselves becomes really, really negative. So this is why I encourage you to consider that a lot of times stigma is born out of the pains of oppression. And a lot of that pain has very deep historical roots that extend from the transatlantic slave trade until right now in 2021. But the reality of it is we are working hard as a field to address those issues so that we can knock down those barriers and allow for greater access and equity and support. And one of the best ways that we've done that is for people that look like me. So, right. So it's having more people in these fields be able to provide this level of care and support is something that has allowed us to feel safer. And I get it. Not all skin folk is kinfolk. But the more of us that exist in the field, the more we call attention to the ills of it. And the more we're able to deeply connect and understand what your cultural needs are, to know what your traumas are, to understand that when you come in and you're talking a certain way and you exist and you live your life a certain way, that you don't have to feel like you have to start all over and explain it to someone. You can sit in front of someone and they just know, they get it on a deeper level than someone who may not have the same background and same identity. It's also about these institutions being more direct about their impact and their role in the culture of white supremacy and racism and other systemic oppression between ageism, sexism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, and how that's negatively impacted folks. And for those of us with mixed marginalized identities at their intersections, and by intersections, I mean, if you are a Black woman, and if you are a Black woman who happens to be trans, if you're a Black woman who happens to be trans and also happens to have a disability, there are compounded ways that people will attempt to stigmatize you. So knowing that the field has provided us with opportunities to have more diversity of experience, more diversity of thought, and more exposure to the needs of communities that will further allow us to help more people, the better. This is why there are so many people now recognizing the value in going to talk to someone. No, you will not automatically be given a diagnosis. No, most of us will not just try to give you a medication and send you on your merry way. If anything, clinical social workers, master's level clinicians, and doctoral level clinicians and psychologists actually work to depathologize you. And by depathologize, that means they go out of their way to find alternatives to make you feel like yourself outside of medication, outside of putting labels and diagnoses. And don't get me wrong, sometimes they're necessary, but the goal is to not just provide a label and a medication and poof, send you on your way and be done, but rather it's to show up with you empathically and be present wholly to ensure that your needs are met. And sometimes that means doing things related to the culture, related to your family, related to your school environment, your work environment, you name it. But the goal is to always show up for you. So again, breaking down the stigmas and those barriers means we do have to understand the historical roots of our trauma, but that also means we have to recognize how sometimes our culture's attempt to protect us from having to deal with those pains can sometimes prevent us from actually acknowledging them and dealing with them in an effective way. And that's the goal, is to bring the culture full circle by having more people be involved in the work that we do. And we can honor who we are, we can honor those pains, we can honor those experiences, and we can honor the ways in which we're working to move forward and establish a newness in the field that has a little bit more color to it. So I did also want to go over a couple of resources and actually how to find therapists that look like you, because I know that that can be hard and it can feel really intimidating. It's actually an exercise I do with several of my classes. I send them on a scavenger hunt. I tell them, all right, now I need you to go find 5 eating disorder treatment centers in Inglewood and Calumet Heights on the Gary, Indiana border over in Pilsen. I need you to find these same treatment centers in Evanston and Skokie and Wicker Park and Lincoln Park and in the Loop, and tell me what the difference are. The reality of it is there's going to be more resources in areas that have additional financial stability as a community, but those areas also tend to be less diverse. So when we are leading our own support, it can feel intimidating and it can feel almost impossible. But there are lots of groups and organizations that have actually been put together to help our ability to make that process easier. So one thing you can do is ask your local mental health professional. So you all know one as of now. So if you ever need help finding somebody in your area, in your community, I got you. Actually, I get a lot of requests for referrals on a regular basis. I know people who see people on a sliding scale, which is a question you can ask. Sliding scale means that you don't have the ability to pay someone's full fee. And based on your income, what is the lowest rate possible available to them? So if you're a self-pay client, sliding scale is something you want to ask for. If you have insurance, you just want to check in to make sure that they take your insurance there. They can do a pre-check just to make sure that you're able to actually see them specifically. But also you want to consider exactly the different places that you can go in order to find stuff as well. So I mentioned a little bit ago that there are a couple of organizations that have actively worked to ensure that people like us have the ability to be seen and our needs to be met. So I'm just going to show you a couple of websites and I'll provide my information again. That way, if you have more questions later on, you can definitely check in. So if you have a tiny human or know someone else who does, Therapy for Black Kids is bomb. I've used it a couple of times for myself. So essentially the goal is to find child and adolescent therapists and social workers that can provide support to tiny people. And when we're talking about kids, typically the age is somewhere between 18 and younger, but typically the work can also look like 14 and younger. So they have a complete directory where you can look through the therapist locator up here on the top of the screen. And it provides you with a few additional websites that you can consider. So Melanin and Mental Health is a really great one. They also have a directory, Inclusive Therapist. There is a Queer Therapist of Color website as well. I'm actually going to make you a little cheat sheet of all of these places and I'll provide it so that it can be passed out to you all. Psychology Today, but also Therapy for Black Girls and Therapy for Black Men are also organizations and groups that you can draw on as well. They also have some parenting tools here too, because honestly, sometimes the ways that we were raised aren't ways that allowed us to really feel great when we grew up. And so that we don't pass down those transgenerational curses and traumas, we have to have the tools and ability to do so. So I'm glad that Therapy for Black Kids has that available. So here's Therapy for Black Men. Again, it has a long list of resources. They have a blog. Feel free to follow them on social media. If you're looking for a therapist or you are a therapist and you want to be added to their directory, you can do that here. And then you also have Therapy for Black Girls, very same setup. They also have a dope ass podcast, so feel free to check that out. Finding a therapist or also to be added to their directory is here as well. And when using these directories, you don't have to have all the information filled in necessarily. So you just click on Find a Therapist. And what it'll do is it'll pull up its general landing page and you can put in if you want to do in-office visits or virtual visits. Because of COVID, lots of people are doing virtual office hours. There's also Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health, which is another great, not only resource in order to find mental health services, but it's also a full community resource too. They actually have a tangible cafe here in the Chicagoland area where you can go get a cup of coffee and part of the proceeds go towards increasing equity and access to mental health services for Black people too, and people of color all as a whole. They also talk a little about Into Therapy, which is a different type of theoretical orientation that's specifically based off of African traditions and African American cultural traditions as well. And then this is the one that I actually own and run. It's called Coffee Hour, and it's specifically for people who are interested in getting into the field of psychology or clinical social work or clinical nursing. But it also serves as a directory, and there's over 1,000 members here that I can connect you to on a regular basis in the event you need my help and my support to do it. But also, if you're interested in getting into the field and you don't know how to start or how to make yourself a competitive applicant, we do a lot of that too. And then, of course, there is the Black Male Man Cave. Now, this resource is specifically for Black men who are looking to build community. And part of that community building allows for more opportunities for socialization and support. So again, if you need any help finding a place that is going to suit your needs, or you just want to work on developing your own ability to advocate for yourself and show up for you, feel free to let me know. Another big component part of that is making sure that you know that it's okay to date your therapist. Just because it didn't work out for the first person you met doesn't mean that therapy is a bust. It just means that we try something different. But again, my name's Leila. I work through the Department of Psychology. My email is Ellis-Nelson@roosevelt.edu. Thank you guys. And if you need anything, you know where to find me.